event processes moving forward. So to do this, I really want to encourage everyone to participate in the session today. And get ready to take screenshots and ask questions, really engage throughout today's conversation. And I've dedicated the last bit of the conversation to really drill into any specific Q&As that y'all have. So let's save any high-level questions or even really specific stuff for the very end. Anything I don't get to today, I will answer via LinkedIn or email later. Hopefully there's a lot of great questions, but I'm going to teach you some new things today as well. Most importantly, a new kind of tool I found and I'm excited to use, I want y'all, like I said, to participate in today's conversation. So if everyone can either pull up their phone or head on to polev.com/PowerToFly PO857, you'll get a nice window that will open all of the polls that we'll be taking throughout the conversation today. You can also text this PowerToFly PO857 to 22333, and then you'll be able to participate, like I said, in all of the polls that we'll be going through today. Not to mention, utilize that Q&A tool that we have on the incredible Bevy virtual conference platform. I do just want to let you know before you do participate that standard text message rates apply. So while it may be free for you or up to 20 cents on some carriers, if you do not have a text messaging plan. So the service that we're using today is serious about privacy, and I can't see any of your phone numbers, and you will never receive follow-up text messages outside of the presentation. Capitalization does not matter throughout the presentation, and you'll see what I mean in just a bit, but spelling and spaces do. You can participate without downloading another app, but if you want to, there is an app that makes this super, super easy. It's available on both the Android and the Apple app stores. So while everyone is logging in, yes, thank you, Evan, for posting that link in the chat. That's super helpful. I want to just kick us off with a practice poll here. And the question that I want to ask all of y'all is, what's the best show you've watched during quarantine? And we'll kick this off just to, like I said, break the ice, troubleshoot a little bit. As your answers pop in here, you type your answers in, they will show on our little word cloud today, so you can change your answer. Some of the polls will let you submit more than one. Please try and only submit one, unless you're really passionate about more than one show. But as you'll see, this is live participation from everyone who is on this workshop right now. This is our practice poll. But I want to warm everyone up and get you excited for today's conversation. So thank you, everyone. Great shows here. Some of these I've never even heard of, so I'm definitely going to have to screenshot this myself and check some of these out afterwards. This is great. I don't think anyone can complain with Schitt's Creek, so walking away with all those Emmys, that's fabulous. And as you'll also see, the more people submit the same answer, again, why spelling and spacing counts, those words will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So the most submitted answers will be the biggest in the word cloud if you've never used a word cloud before. But this is great. Thank y'all so much. Like I said, this was just our warm up. We're going to get into the weeds in just a second here, but really appreciate everyone participating. Let's move on. Wow, everyone is just very, we are moving along here. All right. Whoops, it's getting ahead of me. So our next poll here is, how comfortable are you when you're hosting virtual events? And I want to start with, 1 being I'm absolutely terrified, up to 5, I'm a pro, watch me shine. And I'm talking about getting yourself set up, putting your camera on as the host or the moderator, or possibly even a panelist. Where does your comfortability start when it comes to hosting? And then I want you to submit your answers. I'm sorry, team. The screen is a little delayed, but here we go. 1 through 5, either text your answer, participate in the poll, and we'll see where everyone is at. It looks like the majority of our audience here is at the 4 stage, which is actually really great. I would probably consider myself either the 4 or 5. As you can see, there are always technical difficulties that happen with any software, so that would knock me down probably a point. But it's also good to see that there's some people out there that are terrified. The point of this session is hopefully to alleviate that number 1 and get you feeling a lot more comfortable about hosting, about filling these potentially awkward silences and getting everyone on your event to participate and feeling super comfortable so you can lead that conversation as a moderator. So this is great. I'm glad we have kind of a middle ranking here. The last and final question of the beginning of the conversation today is going to be, which software are you currently using as you host your virtual event? So I want you to just type in your software. So are you using Bevy Virtual Conference? Do you use Zoom, Hangouts, WebEx? Do you use Facebook? Oh, that's awesome. Teams, Blue Jeans, Hopin. What is the software that you and your team uses the most when you're hosting virtual events? Or perhaps not even your team, but you personally. What does your community use when you run events? So Zoom is definitely the number 1 here, and I'm glad because that's what we use too, and definitely has a lot of tricks of the trade to master hosting on Zoom. As simple as the platform is, it can always be optimized. Intrado, Pathable, that's great. On24, StreamYard, Restream, Microsoft, this is great. YouTube, gosh, it's changing so fast. Slack, that's great. Really, really good stuff here. But again, I think Zoom is probably number 1 with Bevy, WebEx. They're all pretty much the same after Zoom, Bevy, and WebEx. But this is great. Yeah, keep putting your answers in here and we'll dive in. So I think what's most important about understanding software, and when we talk about what software we use and choose, and I've talked about this in a few different conversations in the past, but the number 1 most important piece about choosing your software is your comfortability with it. So what are you most comfortable using? And I always recommend that is what you should stick with and master, because the more comfortable you are as an event host and event moderator, the better the entire event's going to turn out as a whole. Which kind of leads me to our next slide here. It's not a poll, I'm sorry, but we'll do more polls in just a bit. But let's start with the elephant in the room here, which is confidence. So the audience has no idea if this is your first virtual event or your 150th virtual event. And truthfully, they don't need to know. They think that you're the expert and are expecting you to bring your full self to the conversation, regardless of where you stand on the pro spectrum. The goal of the workshop today is to provide you with new tools and resources that you need to get into your circle of power with the ability to tackle any obstacles that you might face during your hosting experience. So as we dive into some of these tricks and tools of the trade, another poll, woo! I want to ask you, how many of these things do you do before all of your virtual events? Do you do a technology check? What about co-host speaker research, name pronunciation checks, goal clarifications of your event? Or do you just not do any of these? These are your options. If you do one of these, put one of these. If you never do them, put never do them. But I want to get a pulse from the audience. How many of these are you doing on an event by event basis? So feel free to submit your answers now. Most of us do a technology check. That's great. We can't tick all of them. No, you can either, oh, that's a good point. You should be able to tick all of them actually. Only allows select one. Darn, okay. There's my technology checkpoint. If you've done more of them, put them in the chat and then I can kind of get a pulse check from there. Or do the one that you think is most important from right now. All of them, great. I do see some people have done none of them, so that's also important to note. Great, all of them, amazing. Also gender pronouns, yes, fantastic, Kiara. Great. Yes, goal clarification. I'm going to dive into all of these in just a second, but want to pulse check, who is doing these, who's not doing them, what's maybe super innovative for y'all. Yeah, not never do any, just never do all. Yes, Megan, super important. Great. Awesome. I know. I think as virtual event hosts, a lot of the times, we, at least for myself, we're hosting anywhere between 10 to 20 virtual events a week. And it can be a super daunting task to go through all of these. And, for us, if we're event pros, some of this stuff is commonplace, but then you get on the line with someone who maybe has only used WebEx or only used Teams, and they're unfamiliar with where the mute button is on the Zoom control panel. And then the whole experience is really thrown off, or people get very confused. So it's important to make sure that we're touching on all of these pieces of the puzzle, but for a few different reasons, which I want to go through right now. So let's start with the technology check. And a lot of y'all have put great answers to these, each of these individual items in the chat, which is fantastic. I'm gonna have to look through it and make adjustments to my notes. But as someone who considers themselves a virtual events pro, I can't tell you the number of times I've logged onto an event and had technical issues. Be it, today, a couple minutes ago, my camera wasn't working, my headphones sound like I'm underwater, or, my slides don't present the way that I want them to. Not only is it super embarrassing as a moderator, panelist, virtual events presenter, but it's extremely stressful because then you're troubleshooting in the moment. I can't emphasize this point enough. It's your responsibility as an event host or moderator or participant to ask for that prep call, that prep session, that tech check. Even if it's just yourself and whoever is putting on the event, or with all of the participants that are speaking. If you're using a fairly common software like Zoom, and again, you check with the participants and panelists, and everyone's clear that this is being used in a very traditional fashion, and the setup explanation is very clear in the instructions, then I say perhaps you can steer away from the technology check, but always, encourage anyone who's speaking on your panel to do that technology check, run through absolutely everything that's going to be happening, from screen sharing to microphone checks, Q&As, so everyone is comfortable with the structure of what I will call the control panel later on in today's conversation, but so there are no day of mishaps. So this prep session actually serves several purposes. So like I said, one, we're testing technology, audio, video, but secondly, you're building rapport with your speakers and guests. Make sure taking time out of this prep session to research who you're hosting or on said panel with. Find out what they do, where they've worked, if they've written any really great content lately, or really anything that can help you relate to this person on a deeper level. I really like that we talked about pronouns. Get their pronouns. During this prep call, you can utilize this opportunity to inquire deeper about these connections and take notes that will help your live talk track run smoother and flow nicer on the day of the actual event. So number 3, ask about name pronunciation. And again, ask about pronouns. What's worse than having live technical difficulties during the actual event, but pronouncing your co-host or co-panelist names wrong? It's terrible, and it's super awkward and super uncomfortable. I always ask for the actual phonetic spelling, and then I write it down on my calendar, on the calendar invite, in 3 different places. So I am absolutely sure I am saying, my interviewee, my panelists' names correctly. Writing it down is key. Even if you think you'll remember it, there's always a slight chance that you don't, and at least you'll have it right there in front of you or on your calendar invite in case you forget last minute. Last but not least, number 4, get a clear understanding on the objective for the talk at hand and make sure each speaker is bought in. I know someone else mentioned above how important this is. And again, this is something that, of all 4 of these probably goes most skipped during the prep session. But I end every single prep call for any virtual event that I'm hosting saying, okay, just to be clear, this is what the audience is going to take away from the conversation. I audibly hear all of the other panelists, the hosts say, yes, that is my goal. Yes, that is my goal. And then we can end the call knowing that, okay, we're all prepared. We know what the audience is going to take away from this conversation, and then we can move, on about our days. This also allows you as a panelist, speaker, host, moderator to prepare even more effectively, knowing what the actual goal is. Because sometimes we'll get on a call and realize, oh, wow, all of us have different goals or objectives here. How can we align these things? Or, where are the synergies between these panelists? Super, super important. So do not forget to do this during your prep call. So now that we've got some of the pre-event stuff squared away, let's talk about day of operations. And I want to do another quick poll to pulse check all of y'all to see if you have a dual monitor set up. So super easy question. Yes, I have a dual monitor. No, I do not have a dual monitor set up. So feel free to pop your answers into the poll now. Awesome. Most of us do. This is great. Yeah, I'm always very surprised. People who host lots and lots of virtual events that don't have monitors, you're making your life so much more difficult, but it can be done. But the next part of this conversation is going to be about actually setting yourself up for success, physically setting yourself up for success. So great. Once you have two, you can never go back. I totally agree. I'm almost at that point where I want to invest in one of those, sliding laptop monitors for all the virtual events. Triple monitor. Oh, that's great. I love it. Excellent. 79% of us have two monitors, so that is great. Let's move along here. So there's a lot to cover. And like I said, when I host virtual events, and these are, anywhere between 5, 10, 15 events a week, it gets very crazy and hectic. I always like to have a checklist of things that I am physically noting off before each event, gets started. So reading the presentation notes out loud without your deck. Is everything really clear? Are you, do you have the flow properly written down? And, maybe this is done a few weeks before the actual event, but running through this a few times on your own, just so you're comfortable with what you're actually going to be saying. Forgetting about the deck for a minute is really, step number one. Step number two, reading your notes out loud with your deck. Do the slides and the notes match up? Is everything really cohesive? Should you add another slide? Are there any visuals that could enhance the conversation, make it, more easily digestible by your audience? How do the notes and the presentation line up? Super, super key. Number three, turn off all your computer notifications. Do not just mute your applications. I am going to dive into this even more heavily because this is probably one of the most important tools that I have taught my team about muting notifications, and I'm shocked when I see how many people don't actually know how to do this. Duplicate your presentation tabs. Also going to walk you through this in a little more detail, but if you don't have yes, includes shutting down Slack. Printing out your notes, pulling them up on your phone. There are lots of workarounds if you don't have a monitor. I'm gonna explain those. And then setting up your control panel. So this is like the meat and potatoes of my virtual event success, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So while the first two items are pretty self-explanatory, I really want to focus on the last three because I firmly believe there are some event experts out there who actually don't know some of the tricks of the trade. And I want to start by touching upon the muting computer notifications. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are loads of different ways that you can share your screen, and they're all different on all of the different platforms. In the heat of the moment, and again, even experts make mistakes, we can share the wrong screen, or we share our entire desktop and you don't have access, and you don't have all of your notifications shut off. There have been times, perhaps, that you get a super embarrassing text from your mom mid-presentation and nobody wants baby pictures, weird photos, texts, calls coming in while you're doing a talk. I can assure you from experience, it is not fun. So if you're using a Mac, find the 3 bars at the top right corner of your screen and click on them. If you scroll to the very top, you're actually not placed at the top when you open that menu, you'll see this Do Not Disturb toggle. This will shut everything off on your notifications, alarms, texts, calls, Slack notifications, everything. This will shut it all off so those notifications are not shown on your screen. If you're using a PC, this is just a little bit more challenging just because it's a few more buttons. I have the Windows user experience here. You go to your systems, notifications and actions, toggle the get notifications from apps and other senders to off. You will also see there's a ton of options on a PC for what you can turn off, when, why, timer settings. My recommendation, just shut it all down. Because like I said, you never know if during that one meeting you will have, XYZ people calling, texting, trying to get a hold of you. I'll show you how to set yourself up your control panel so you can still access those notifications, but you just want to keep your notifications from popping up on the screen that you're sharing publicly. So I think we're all pretty clear there. So now I want to talk about the actual dual monitor setup. So if you're someone who does a lot of event hosting, as I said before, I highly recommend investing in a monitor. And everything I'm talking about can be done with one screen, but all around it's a lot easier when you can set everything up onto individual screens. If you have a monitor, this is an example of how I set up my space. So I have my monitor set up just for my presentation. So this is the screen, individual screen that I am sharing live. And then I have what I have referred to earlier today as my control panel set up on my laptop. It's key to have access to 2 copies of your presentation. So you can kind of pulse check between what's coming up next, what you're sharing live, and vice versa. If you do not have a monitor, if you do not have a monitor, pull up your presentation on your phone or print out your slides or speaker notes. Again, this gives you, an opportunity to read through your notes or see what's coming ahead, take notes live, and be able to access both simultaneously. Kira's asking, this is assuming that your camera is in your laptop, right? Correct. Obviously, it would be vice versa if you're using your monitor's camera, and we'll talk about that in a second too. So when we have our presentation in its own tab on our monitor and we're preparing to share our screen as a presenter, it's crucial that this presentation is in its own tab so we can properly set up the control panel on its own individual screen. When you go to share your screen, make sure you are only selecting to share this tab or the individual window, not the desktop in its entirety. And if you have other tabs that you're going to be sharing throughout your talk, make sure to put them all into one cohesive window that you can flip back and forth. Then you don't have to pause screen sharing, flip to another screen, and the audience doesn't get the whole overarching view of your desktop. It just makes everything much neater and cleaner. So as we saw before, based on the poll, we use Zooms for almost 100% of our virtual events. But I've used this exact setup where I'm sharing my screen in one monitor, have my control panel set up on my laptop in Teams, Hangouts, WebEx, BlueJeans. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm happy to answer more specific questions about your individual setup at the end or via email, LinkedIn. But for the sake of time, I want to walk you through what's possible right now in Zoom. So this is my control panel. So there's a lot going on here, and I want to walk you through this piece by piece. But when you're in Zoom, you have your traditional panel controls. So mute, video, participants, screen share, this little black bar here on your screen. So on this little panel, if you may, you can actually drag that across your screen, even when you're screen sharing. So as you're hovering above your screen share on your monitor or wherever you're sharing, if you kind of make a mouse movement, you can drag that bar below so you have full access to it. And this is how we're going to bring up all of these additional menus and have them on your screen to reference throughout your virtual event. So I drag this over to my control panel, which is my laptop. and set my screen up in a series of quadrants. So, like I said, there's a lot going on here, but I have my second copy of my presentation pulled up in its own tab, my text messages, my Slack, just in case there are any escalations. Obviously, you can keep these closed if you're not using them. I have the gallery view of my participants. I have my chat box. I have my participant menu. I have a blank document for notes, and I actually have the event invitation itself. So like I said, a lot going on here. But even if I don't end up using all of these tools, I have quick and easy access to them just in case I need them. And I'm not scrambling mid-event to find something that I could need. What's also key here is that you have access all at one glance on your screen. So you'll see everything is very strategically dragged to a different part of my screen, so I can just tap it once and see everything. You don't have to minimize any windows to see my text, my gallery view, my participants. Everything is spaced out into these quadrants. Also noting that my camera is at the top of my screen, so anything I need to look at while I'm talking is at the very top. I mimic this setup for essentially every virtual event that I participate in, even this one right now. I'm looking at my screen, looking at y'all. My suggestion is to get yourself comfortable. Set up 15 to 20 minutes in advance so you know your layout. You know exactly which tab, all of your notes, your QA, your participant panel, where everything is located, and then you can, again, just pop between structures or tabs, if you may, while you're hosting. Yes, I agree, Mark. We need an event ops interface. I totally agree. So now that we have covered the control panel, and again, there's a lot going on here, so if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to dive in deeper into the Q&A, but I want to make sure we get through all the actual content here. But one of the equally important pieces of event prep is your pre-chat banter, or as some may call it, your icebreaker. It's super interesting because I love to talk, so I've never had this problem, but the most popular piece of negative feedback that we've gotten from customers during our virtual events has been someone calling out the awkward silence that happens at the beginning of the event when the moderator isn't necessarily comfortable chatting with the audience. So the moderator's great during the event. They're super friendly. They're, of course, getting through all of the pieces of the event puzzle, if you may, in a really professional manner, but there's no engagement at the beginning of the event. And sometimes that can feel really awkward. I usually stick to these conversation starters that are on the screen, but I would love to kind of hear what y'all are using for your icebreaker questions. So is there something that you ask at the beginning of your conversation that really engages the audience, that makes them feel comfortable, that just really, I guess, starts the conversation in a positive manner that maybe, is not traditionally like, what's the weather like in your location? Would love to hear it. If you could be a spice or an herb, what would you be and why? This is great. Yeah, type your answers in here. I kind of want to use this as like another pulse check, and maybe we can all take another 1 or 2 icebreakers back to our virtual event. What color M&M are you? I love it. Best Pixar movie? That's great. What show are you binging? These are great answers, everyone. I'm also going to answer some of these questions in the chat. My glasses are very reflective. Yes. Is it hard for me to make eye contact? Is there a way to deal with that? Great question. So usually it's not this bad, but we're just having terrible storms in upstate New York, so it's very dark in my room. Usually I have a couple, not pole lights, gosh, ring lights that are illuminating, but the lights keep going dark and light. I figured it would be too bright if I had them on. So I would just check your lighting also as you're setting up, and make sure that, you're in the most non-reflective glasses perspective as humanly possible. But that's a good question. These are great. What Harry Potter house are you in? I love it. Ducks or cats? Interesting. All right, this is good. Well, thank you, everyone. These are really interesting icebreakers. I love it. Definitely things that I have not thought of before. Great. So the next kind of piece of this puzzle as a moderator, your sample greeting script. This is something that, this particular script, I've written down and I use again for probably almost every virtual event that I've ever hosted or moderated. One, because it kind of gives our audience and our panelists and everyone who's participating in the event just a little insight into how everything's going to be functioning moving forward, how much time we have left, that we're really not sitting here and just waiting for the event to start. We want to engage. You want to get people excited and involved. And I say this probably 5 to 10 times before the actual chat. It's kind of on you as the moderator to keep everyone's energy and excitement up, and there are always early birds and people who are willing to talk and get involved early on and share their stories or where they're coming from. It's great to utilize these people to really kick off the conversation and make everyone feel as warm and as welcome as humanly possible. And we'll talk about kind of your role in that as a moderator in just a second. Great. Just looking at all the great comments in the chats. It's lovely. So during the event now, to kind of cap off the conversation, I want to talk quickly about what you're doing as a speaker during the actual event. And it's very easy when you're on a panel or you're not the main focus of the event to check out and swipe through emails or look at your phone, but please do not do this. It's your job to actively listen to what your fellow event participants are saying, just as you would an in-person event. So you can piggyback off what others are saying. The best conversations are the ones that are non-scripted, organic ones. And you won't provide value if you aren't listening to what people are saying, what your fellow panelists are saying. So, step one, actively listen. You can learn a lot as a speaker or a panelist from your fellow panelists or from your fellow panelists, moderators, speakers, and kind of thinking back to the prep part of our conversation today. If you've done your due diligence and you've done your research on who you're speaking to or with, then you should be armed with a ton of great content and info that you can be kind of mind mapping in the back end on how and where you want to take this conversation moving forward. Next, take notes. There's nothing I hate more than when moderators or panelists are ingenuine with their transitions or completely miss the point of what their speaker was saying, just to jump to the next point or try and move the conversation along or even kind of put some of the focus on them. So if someone says something valuable, I keep a sticky note right in front of me that has notes and all kinds of little snippets of things that the speakers say that really inspire me or make me think about something else. Because as a host, of course, you're looking at all different screens and you're trying to moderate the chat and let people into rooms. So you've got a lot going on to remember absolutely everything that's happening. Taking notes is absolutely, absolutely crucial. Then when a transition point comes up, instead of saying, wow, that's awesome, let's move to the next question, you can make a connection. Wow, Jane, your experience returning to work after backpacking Europe is the perfect segue to my next question, blah, blah, blah. That is so much cleaner, crisper, and more professional than just moving from question to question to question. And last but not least, control the conversation. So whether you're moderating, speaking, or on a panel, you are steering this virtual event ship with your words. If there is something you do not want to cover or speak about, don't bring it up. Don't put it in your notes. Don't put it in a slide. Avoid at all cost. If you talk about it or you bring it up, you're opening yourself up to questions, follow-up, all different kinds of things. So if you are not comfortable with a certain topic, just don't bring it up. don't feel that you as a moderator or presenter or panelist have to answer every single question that comes in from the audience. It's perfectly acceptable to say, hey, I'd love to think about that one a little bit more. Can I follow up with you after the event? I've done that many times. It's not awkward. It's just you being real and genuine, and perhaps you don't have the best answer right now, but you would like to look that answer up for someone. The worst thing you could do is just spitball something right, during the live event and then wish you didn't say something later. Also, if you're worried about not having enough questions, my rule of thumb is to always write down 13 questions that you have on a piece of paper, on another tab. This is perhaps something you bring up in your control panel that will help you steer the conversation after what you've prepared is over. It's very possible that sometimes audiences just aren't, in it. Maybe it's early and they need their, mind jogged a little bit before asking questions. I always have themed questions prepared so you can engage that conversation yourself. Again, steer that ship as the host, moderator, panelist, and you can create the content that you want to talk about. So last but not least here, I think the most important part about setting yourself up for virtual event greatness is having fun. If you're not having fun, if you're miserable, if you're not enjoying yourself, then what's the point of your audience being here? We are in such a unique time and place where we get to meet and interact and host events with people from across the globe who have such different experiences and stories and information to share that as a moderator, and I say this all the time, I feel very, empowered and selfish that I get to talk to such great people every single day and learn from them and their experiences. And the more fun that you're having doing this, the more fun your audience is going to have doing this. So if you're visibly excited and enjoy what you do, then that's going to transcend to whoever you're speaking to or whoever you're speaking with on your panel. It's always very clear on who in a panel is more excited to be there and who is dreading their live. So, with that, I, really appreciate everyone being here and asking such great questions. I missed a lot of the earlier ones, so would love for people to pop their questions into the Q&A box. Derek wrote in the Q&A, can you come do all my presentations? Maybe. Like I said, I think 15 to 20 virtual events right now is more than enough, but you never know. I'd be happy to answer anyone's questions. If you have specific ones about your setup, about different obstacles that might happen during hosting that maybe I didn't touch on. Kiara has a good question. Oh, let me bop back to some of these. Have you ever had a no-show guest speaker? Yes. One time I did have a no-show guest speaker, and it was probably 2 years ago. And, I think what my advice to someone who has that experience is always have someone on deck that you can do, either a quick Q&A or, perhaps they have a unique experience that they could talk about and would allow you to pivot, pretty seamlessly. At least with most of the virtual events that I host, they're all engagement focused. So regardless of who the speaker is, we pride ourselves on creating a space where people can come and get their questions answered live. So when you kind of lead with that programming and community first event planning, you're always set up for success because your host should have, been prepared and ready to talk about the topic at hand, or maybe you have someone else in your community or, a colleague or someone who you can bring on and kind of have that conversational banter, even if it's just asking questions back and forth with one another. How do you feel about this situation? Blah, blah, blah. It's definitely not fun and it's not easy, but in a pinch, you can always do that Q&A, which is super beneficial to your community. Any tips for doing a pre-recorded session? Well, I guess, Mike, my biggest tip is the beauty of doing a pre-recorded session is that you can, absolutely make it perfect. I'm not one who is a stickler for perfection by any means, but if I'm watching something pre-recorded that I know was pre-recorded and I had no opportunity to attend live, then, I guess my expectation going in is that I'm going to get a ton out of this session because, I'm not getting the opportunity to ask my questions live or interact with my speaker or, do virtual networking. So I would just, as a host, do absolutely everything that you can during the recorded part, or if you're, video editing out afterwards, to make sure that absolutely everything goes off without a hitch. Probably not the best, best answer, but that's my personal opinion. So there's my transparency for you. About the control panel. So you would not advise to display the PowerPoint presentation as presenter's view, which automatically splits the slides into both screens. Yes, you can. I've had a lot of people run into issues with this. And then if you do set it up this way, then you can't have all of the windows open at the same time, which has also been an issue for a lot of people. Of course, there are ways around all of this. You can do, if you're on a Mac, like the 3-swipe and open up like a completely new desktop window. But in my opinion, I really like having my screen shared, that's it, on one monitor, and then every single possible window that I have open or could want to have open in my control panel. Then, if God forbid something happens and I don't know, someone's dying or like the internet cut out on one of our speakers, I have my phone, I have my text messages, I have everything that, I could need in an emergency at my fingertips without having to close a bunch of different tabs and windows. That's, the beauty of having the control panel set up in the way that I have it. I hope that answers your question, Kiara. But of course, do what's best for you. That's probably the most important takeaway from here. If, you only have one monitor and you don't have a printer and your, phone isn't great at bringing up your slides, then of course you're running into a lot of different blockers here that aren't going to make this very easy for you. So there are lots of creative ways that you can, I guess, share your screen and see what's coming next. You just have to find the best solution for you. And I can put my control panel back on the screen if that's helpful for everyone, because I think that is really, really important. Probably one of the most important takeaways from this talk. Tips for keeping your energy up when you're masking serious nerves. That is a great question. Oh, are there more questions popping up in the Q&A? Oh, great, great, great. Okay. Masking nerves. I just like to be very honest and transparent with people. And, that's what I've guided a lot of my host trainees to do as well. If you're nervous, just say that you're nervous. I have a host that says she's nervous probably a lot more than she should, but she, is very honest and makes people feel very comfortable when she does that. So it's okay, embrace it. You'll probably get a lot of encouragement in the chat if you're feeling nervous and people say, no, you're doing a great job, or, I'm nervous too. And then, from there, you're just gaining energy. And truthfully, the more you do this, the more events you host, the better off you're going to be in the long run. You're going to feel more prepared. Your setup is now great. So nothing can go wrong on the back end, hopefully. And that will set you up for a lot more success, just hosting all events moving forward. Great, great, great questions. How do you handle participants that derail the conversation or are long-winded or rude? Great, great question. So, one, definitely take a pulse check of your community. And, especially in today's day and age, there are lots of ways as a moderator you can control the conversation, whether you're in a webinar setting where, people can't come off mute and, are subject to just posting in the chat or just posting in the Q&A. There are some tools that allow you to delete comments or, remove people entirely and remove their comments. There are other softwares like, Zoom Meeting, which I use, where unfortunately, even if you boot someone, their comments stay. And I think, Shayna, you mentioned that too. What are your tips for dealing with unruly guests? it's really hard. And as a moderator, it's something, again, that comes with a lot of practice. Sometimes these people are, they are diligent in their rude and unruly comments. And what I would say is, that's why you keep all of these screens up and, you're aware of them as a host. So the second you see someone posting comments or, things that shouldn't be, shared in the public forum, it's your responsibility to kick these people out. Or if, you're in a setting like this, I would probably have had, a co-host or someone where, they can boot people out of the chat for me if I'm not super comfortable, responding to all of these questions. It's really, really tricky. And unfortunately, we're living in this virtual world where people are getting unruly and, everyone has a lot of opinions. Sometimes it's okay to have conflicting opinions, and we have to embrace that if we want to, build stronger communities and really, get people to see people as people. I mean, there's a difference between someone who is being, an awful human and someone who is just speaking their opinions. So, if someone's getting really long-winded or, perhaps derailing the conversation, as a moderator, it's okay to jump in and say, hey, this is really good stuff, but I want to make sure we're saving space, or we give the floor to more, members of the community, more attendees of this chat. And I actually see a really great conversation or question or comment that ties into what you're trying to say. Like I said, steer the ship. You can make stuff up. You can pretend people are DMing you. You have full control as a moderator to make this live conversation go whichever way is easiest and best for you and your community. Great questions here. There's no way I'm going to get to all of these live, but I'm going to do my best. Do you feel that familiarity of participants within the platform signing into an engagement is meaningful for a successful event? I think that it is helpful. I do not think that it is crucial to event success. Aside from being a community builder, I'm also a marketer. So I completely understand that, the less clicks someone has to make to get into an event, the better, the more, signups you're going to have. But you also need to, weigh the pros and cons of what's important to you for the event. And actually about my talk that I gave last year at CMX was all about creating more engaging events, and something that we did as a company and the platform that I launched, we made submitting questions mandatory for every single virtual event that we host on PowerToFly. And that has helped us really, equate success to these events, because people knew that when they signed up for an event, that their questions were going to get answered by the host, the speaker, the moderator, the panel, instead of, just logging on to an event and hoping that they were going to get the information that they were looking for. You have no idea when you sign up for an event. I mean, gosh, I could have been talking about something totally different. But because I get the chance to answer your questions, you're at least getting some piece of value from this, which is so important. So yes, community members who have been there and understand how your flow works will be able to optimize that value. But again, your flow should still be easy to someone new, because those are the people that you want to come and, of course, get new members, new emails, new traffic to your site. So it shouldn't be too hard for them either. But, we love our engaged community members. Oh, Kate, how do you ensure that controlling the conversation is balanced with addressing what learning arrives in the room? Especially important, but perhaps, so I think we've talked about that a little bit. And we mitigate this a lot when it comes to, like I said, requiring all of our attendees to submit a question when they sign up for our chats. This way, we know that the content that we provide directly correlates to, what our audience wants to learn, know, and get out of the conversation. We found that just structuring the majority of our virtual events in this Q&A fashion is quite literally exactly what everyone's looking for. Nobody likes being talked to for an hour. So, the best practice for me and my best tip for everyone is to, create content that really pulls your audience in, gets them engaged and wanting to learn more and ask you more questions about what you do and why you're, the expert talking about it. What about us? These lots of questions about losing internet at the time of your presentation. So, as Valentina mentioned, definitely recommend having a co-host or even 2 co-hosts. I saw a lot of people talking about using Restream and YouTube, and we've used a lot of these tools too. And I can tell you from experience, it is hard to, set up your virtual event, then make sure you're streaming on YouTube and then on Restream, and just the compilation of all of these softwares is very challenging. So I can't imagine there are many situations in today's, day and age, the virtual world that we live in, where, you wouldn't be more successful if you had someone else to tag team with you. And I know, from my own personal experience, we're a global team. My internet in upstate New York is a lot better than, my teammates in Argentina, but sometimes my internet is not great. And I know sometimes their internet isn't great. So even if you're not watching the event and live participating, we always have someone on standby or backup that we can flip to be the host. So you set up your host settings and then your co-host settings, regardless of if they're actually co-hosting or not. If anything were to happen, then they can kind of take over and run the event from there. But definitely recommend having at least 1 co-host, if not 2. Okay, Lisa asked, how do you do that in Zoom, having them sign up with a question? So I know it can be done with Zoom. We actually have we created our own event CMS to do just this because it was that important for us. But a lot of platforms, so let's say, we used to use Eventbrite. You can just take your Zoom link and put it into the Eventbrite registration page. And then, you have a bunch of required questions that someone would have to fill out when they register for your event. You would just make one of the required questions. Do you have any questions for your speaker? And then, of course, everyone has to fill that out, and you get a nice little database at the very end of all of the questions that were submitted. We just copy and paste those, send them to our speakers. They get to look through them. They get to prepare their own content, feel super comfortable with what the conversation is going to be talking about. And then, again, it's a win-win for both the audience and the speaker. Yeah, I thought so. The Zoom registration setup has the option for custom questions. Yeah, when you set up your event on Zoom, if you're asking for registrations, you can add a custom question. I thought so. This is great. I think I got to all of these. But we do have 7 minutes left. So if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But again, my advice to everyone is to experiment, to try new things, try new platforms. I'm a really big fan of Bevy Virtual. I think this platform is really excellent for a lot of the things that we're talking about today, setting ourselves up for success and, fostering this engagement that we have today. So, and think outside the box. Anything that you can do in person, I firmly believe can be done in a virtual setting, as long as you as a moderator are prepared, you're confident, and you're comfortable trying new things. The world is your oyster, and we are right now building the world of virtual events for our tomorrows to come. So I saw a lot of comments about, we should build this virtual events UI. I would love to be part of that conversation, so please loop me in there. But there's lots that can be done. And, there's so many platforms out there that we can make a real impact as virtual events host, helping everybody else grow and learn and having a great event experience. It just makes it better for all of us because we'll all be attendees at one point. Yay. Lots of good lighting questions. Brett is asking, do you tend to limit your attendees to chat only to discuss, or do you allow them to discuss through video? I'm a huge proprietor to allow everyone microphone access, chat access, and camera access. I know that is a very forward-thinking approach, and perhaps not everyone has, as I guess sophisticated communities. We don't have as many trolls as many of the larger scale communities out there, but I think it's really important to have that person-to-person connection. We're really against anonymity. So, we want you to act as your true self, to ask questions, as you, so we can provide the best experience for you as a human as humanly possible. And maybe that sounds fluffy, but I think at the end of the day, we all have struggles. And for PowerToFly, our platform is really focused on helping women throughout their career journeys and connecting them with companies that are really bought into diversity and inclusion. So if we can't have candid conversations, person to person, video to video, then we're not doing our job. So if you're a community who has that ability to reach people on a more personal level, I say try it. Step outside your comfort zone and allow everyone to turn their cameras on and talk with one another. That's what we would be doing if we weren't in a global pandemic, right? You can't filter what someone says in real life. So give it a go. You might be surprised. Do you use community guidelines or agreements, code of conduct in all of your events? Yes, we absolutely do. It's in our waiver. It's in pretty much every piece of the sign-up process for all of our events. And we're really strict about, if you violate any of the, terms of our code of conduct, then you will be kicked out of the community. We haven't had to do this very often, I will say, so I feel very grateful that that's the case. But setting yourself up for success in that way too helps eliminate a lot of trolls, and being really clear what the value you provide is. Like I said before, everyone has different experiences and perspectives that they can share and bring value to multitudes of conversations, even if it may not be, a C-level leader. It could be, someone who just lost their job. They have just as much insight to provide to someone going through that situation than a lot of people. So, we do have a very strict code of conduct, but also understand that, we have to provide space for everyone to share their experiences. We do not use a waiting room. Of course, Zoom just launched that feature, which now has given us all waiting rooms. So we're kind of working around that currently. But no, we traditionally don't use a waiting room, which makes it a lot easier to do that like pre-chat banter that I really like. Kiara wants to know if I am on Twitter. I am on Twitter. You can catch me at Lauren8Hagerty. I don't tweet a lot, but I usually do around CMX time, so I'm happy to answer questions there as well. But I think that is bringing us right to about time. This is great. Like I said, I love answering everyone's questions. So if there's anything I missed, or you have particular questions that maybe you didn't want to ask live, feel free to shoot me a message. My email is lauren@powertofly.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message, connect with me. I'd love to chat with all of you. I've made so many great connections through CMX. This is truly the best community in the world, and virtual events are my passion. So happy to hear more about what you're doing, maybe optimize my process, and help give you any tips that might make you a virtual event expert. So thank you all for your time.